Johann Sebastian Bach was surely the greatest of church composers. Between 1704 and 1750, he composed perhaps 700 devotional works. His Mass in B minor and magnificent oratorios, the St. Matthew and the St. John Passion, are overtly religious, but many of his secular works he dedicated to the greater glory of God. When we sought to honor him in 1985, the tricentennial of his birth, we did not want to duplicate our earlier tributes from Leipzig. To emphasize the universality of his music and the depth of his Christian commitment, we chose as a setting an Asian city that had been a great center of the early church, dear to the apostles St. Paul and St. Luke, the tomb of St. John the Evangelist, and in legend, the last home of the Virgin Mary. The city is Ephesus, in modern-day Turkey, greatest of the 7 churches and site of the early church councils, whose pronouncements have outlived their once beautiful buildings by nearly 2 millennia. Turkey was then the center of the Byzantine Empire, founded in the 4th century by Constantine, who made Constantinople, now Istanbul, his capital and center of the Eastern Orthodox Church. When we approached the great exponent of Bach, Dr. Rosalyn Tureck, we found by happy chance that her ancestors had lived in Turkey and that she herself had visited it as a student, its beauty still familiar to her. The Bosporus, linking east and west. The opulent Topkapi Palace. The intriguing bazaars. The teeming cosmopolitan streets.
Elhamdülillah, kadıncağız yalnızmış, annecağızı, efendim mübarek.
Although a Muslim country since 1453, when Sultan Mehmet drove the remnants of the Byzantine court from Constantinople, the Turks did not eradicate the older religions. Jew and Christian were considered the people of the book. Synagogues and churches are to be found in the city. And the Emperor Justinian's great basilica, Hagia Sophia, or Divine Wisdom, was preserved, even restored by the conquering Muslims. It is separated from the famous Blue Mosque by fragrant gardens. This magnificent basilica replaced 2 earlier churches destroyed by feuding Christian sects. Justinian, on February 23rd, 532 AD, began to build a temple to rival that of Solomon. 8th century Christian iconoclasts destroyed many of the early mosaics. The Muslim rulers were more civilized. Although their religion forbade the depiction of human forms, they merely covered the faces of the Christian saints with a thin coat of whitewash. Later embellishments and elegant Turkish calligraphy date from the centuries when Hagia Sophia served as a mosque. Today, it is maintained as a universal museum. 8 green porphyry columns were brought from the ruins of what had been one of the 7 wonders of the world, the Temple of Diana at Ephesus, far to the south, on the Asian coast of the Aegean. Legend credits the Amazons with the founding of Ephesus 2,000 years before Christ, and in exile, Androcles, with the establishment of a Greek colony 1,000 years later. By the time of Alexander the Great, it was a rich and famous port, despite intermittent invasions and destruction. Although Ephesus came under Roman domination as capital of the province of Asia, it remained largely a Greek city until the Byzantine Empire crumbled in the late 7th century, the final silting up of its harbor in the first Arab invasion. Crusaders occupied it briefly. Then in 1390, the Ottoman Turks conquered Ephesus and created a new 5th city. But its glory is still the graceful ruins of its magnificent past. Architecture has been called frozen music, two arts that express emotions that cannot be put into words. Bach was not only an inspired musical genius, but a disciplined, dedicated craftsman. He must have loved noble buildings and splendid design, executed by masters. Surely Ephesus would have inspired him. He was not unsophisticated. His years in the ducal courts of Weimar and Cöthen doubtless brought him in contact with Greek sculpture and classical history. His duties in Leipzig included teaching Latin. Ephesus would have sprung to life for him. Bach's deep Christian faith, his familiarity with the New Testament, would have made him hear the echoes of St. Paul's ringing oratory in the ruined theater, words that caused a riot in the city dedicated to the ancient goddess Diana. The local silversmiths feared that the chaste new Christian cult would ruin their profitable trade in souvenir statues. Only a broken column remains of Diana's splendid temple. Church, perhaps the first dedicated to the Virgin Mary, remains and is being restored. It was built by order of Constantine in the 4th century and was the site of the great ecumenical council of Ephesus that proclaimed the Virgin Mary as truly the Mother of God, the Theotokos. The Apostle St. John, it was believed, had brought her to safety here when persecution of the early church began in Jerusalem. On a neighboring hill, Christian and Muslim alike pray at what they believe was her house. St. John's tomb, or rather the basilica that Justinian later built above it, was constructed largely with stones taken from the theater and stadium below. Sacred and secular were mixed and remixed to produce something new and beautiful from the old, as Bach did, but it took later generations to realize it. He was buried in Leipzig in a pauper's grave, in the churchyard of St. John.